On this episode of Eat Sleep Drive, we're comparing the 2010 Lexus ISF to the 2008 BMW M3 that I just sold. We're going to be talking about what makes this Lexus better and worse than the M3. And no, I'm not just going to complain about BMW reliability the whole time. Well, maybe just a little bit. And this is what you get. Power! Oh my gosh. 5-0, mother! Hello everyone, my name is Kurt. You're watching Eat Sleep Drive. And on today's episode, we are talking about my 2010 Lexus ISF that I recently purchased. You may have seen the video where I traveled to Knoxville, Tennessee and purchased this car for a quarter of the price of what it costs new. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch that video. It's a good one. And consider subscribing if you're interested in Lexus ISF content. Now, back to the comparison between these two cars. They're actually similar in a lot of ways, but they do offer unique characteristics from one to the other. See, here's the thing about the ISF that makes it a little bit unique. From 2008 to 2013, when these cars were produced, they only made about 5,000 of them total. And that's in stark contrast to the 25,000 M3s that they made in the same time period of the same generation. So suffice to say that for every 5 BMW M3s you see one Lexus ISF. That's pretty cool in my opinion, and a huge reason why I like the ISF, because it's unique. You just don't see it very often. And being that we're car enthusiasts and we typically like things that set us apart, and cars are a way of expressing ourselves, I think the ISF is pretty cool in that regard. So what's the flip side of that? What's the advantage of the M3 having higher production numbers? Well, it basically comes down to options and a way to customize your M3. See, the big thing is this car never came with a manual transmission, and the BMW was automatic or manual, whichever you prefer. So if you want a manual, you're gonna have to go M3. The decision's already made for you. Now, there are other things outside of just manual versus automatic. You have things like the coupe and the convertible, which is offered in M3, and that's something that's not offered here. If you want one of those, you also have to go M3. Additionally, there were so many more options on the M3 than this ISF. This ISF pretty much just had one option, a upgraded sound and navigation system. That's pretty much it. On an M3, you can get adaptive shocks. You can get a carbon fiber roof or a sunroof. So that's the downside per se of having a low volume, low production run car like the ISF. It's time for us to talk dynamic differences between the M3 and the ISF, because although on paper they look very similar, they make basically the same amount of horsepower, peak horsepower. They are front engine, rear wheel drive, V8 engine, but they're very, very different when you drive them. And the first thing that you'll notice in the ISF is what I'm about to demonstrate right here. I'm at a low RPM. I'm just gonna be at like 3,000 roll on. Torque, baby. 5-0, motherfucker. Yeah, this car is fast. I love getting on this car. It sounds so good. So what you saw there is me demonstrating that this car has plenty of torque, and that's something that the M3 kind of lacks. This car actually has 75 pound-feet more of torque, and you can thank the fact that it has a 5-liter compared to a 4-liter engine in the M3. That's 25% more displacement, so you get more down-low grunt, which especially in a daily driver is a really, really nice thing. And to me, it's the first thing that you notice when you get in this car. I'm just going around this fast sweeper here, and that leads me to the part that's a bit of a downside to the ISF. Well, a big downside to the ISF compared to the M3. While the ISF has more torque and I like the characteristics of the engine, what I don't like is this steering feel. It is basically numb. Really sad to report that. Was really hoping for more from this chassis dynamically. The M3 is definitely superior in that category. I have to concede that. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you guys and say that this steering and this chassis is on par with the M3. It's close. The chassis is close. It actually likes to oversteer quite a bit. The car wants to rotate, which is just lovely, lovely, lovely. But I just don't know what the front tires are doing. I can't feel any road imperfections. I can't feel when they're breaking away. I really just have to listen to them. And while they both cars have such a high level of mechanical grip, and around a track they're gonna be pretty close to identical, it makes it harder to approach the limit in the ISF than the M3. In the M3, I feel like I could jump in and the car would dance with me. I could know exactly what the tires were doing. But in the ISF, it's a little more vague, just a hair. And those are the two biggest differences between these cars. You have way more torque in the ISF, and you get that down low grunt with that 5-liter, but you don't have that amazing steering of the M3 in this car. Still a blast though. Well, it's time to address the elephant in the room, and that of course is reliability. That's what everyone talks about when you compare an ISF to an M3. And of course it's very important and it's true, but I wanted to wait until the last segment to talk about this because I think some of the other stuff that I talked about in the beginning kind of gets glossed over and everyone just goes straight to reliability. This engine has 134,000 miles on it and it's had basically nothing done to it other than routine maintenance. You're just not going to find that on an M3. The M3 has a couple Achilles heels. The rod bearings go out. The tolerance from factory is too tight and they are known to eat rod bearings, and rod bearings are internal to the engine and hard to get to and very integral to the engine itself. And then you have things like throttle body actuators. Those tend to go bad because they have plastic gears in them. They're just like a horrible, horrible design. And then of course you're gonna deal with leaks. I dealt with leaks on my BMW M3, and you just really don't have any of that stuff with this engine. There are a couple problems with this engine, but the difference is they're so much less severe. Whereas with rod bearings or throttle body actuators, that's the kind of stuff that's gonna grenade your engine on your M3 or leave you stranded. Whereas the stuff that goes wrong with this, like sometimes there's a coolant leak in the valley plate, obviously like not ideal, but you'll wanna address that, but you could always top off the coolant. It's not really gonna leave you stranded. The other thing with these cars is that sometimes the exhaust manifold cracks. So you have a little crack in the exhaust manifold, you might hear a tick when you start up the engine. Not gonna strand you. You know, like the severity of these things is so much less than the M3. Now, is there an advantage in a way to the BMW braking all the time? Well, there sort of is, because there's so many shops that support those cars and there's so many aftermarket parts. It's kind of hard to find parts for the ISF because they didn't make too many of them and really they don't brake that much. But the BMW, there's a plethora of parts, there's a plethora of aftermarket companies that make exhaust for them or make suspension kits or whatever. There's really only one company that makes stuff for this car, and if they go under, everyone with an ISF is screwed because no one else makes parts. So you have that kind of thing, and then of course the online community is so much more with the M3 because they sold more of them, so there's a wealth of information about them. There's companies that make new rod bearings for those cars, you know what I mean? So everything has basically been addressed with the M3. Obviously, you just have to go out and do it. That sums it up for the differences between the M3 and the ISF. From an owner perspective, after owning both for a little while, I can confidently say that they offer unique characteristics, and it really just boils down to what you're looking for. Overall, I think this is a better daily driver. It's going to be more reliable, it's slightly more comfortable, and it has more torque, which is more important to me in a daily driver. The M3 has way more theater, is better balanced, and is probably a better second car / track car than this car. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You definitely want to subscribe if you want to see more from this ISF, because I plan to do a couple mods here soon. I mentioned that in the first video, the exhaust is far too quiet. So that's the first thing that we're gonna address. And of course, we'll do some other things like suspension upgrades and things like that. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Follow me on Instagram at EatSleepDriveTV. And I got shirts made, so you can follow the link in the description below if you want a shirt. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.